meeting to order. Welcome to the full council meeting of Bath and North East Somerset Council on Thursday, 17th of November 2022. Item 1 on the agenda is the welcome and evacuation, and I would like to ask Marie to read out the emergency evacuation procedure.
If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the green running person signs to the exit, using either the marble staircase at the end of the building nearest to Bath Abbey or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. There is an evacuation chair for use by disabled people who so wish in the corridor outside the council chamber public gallery.
Thank you very much, Marie. Item 2 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Chair, I have apologies from Councillors Vic Clark, Doug Deacon, Alan Hale, Paul May, Brian Simmons, Alistair Singleton, Andy Waite, Chris Watt, Paul Myers and Ryan Wills. And just a reminder that some members who were not attending have been granted a dispensation for health reasons.
Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest and agree. And again, Marie, are there any interests that you've been notified of?
I've been notified of any.
No. Are there any other further declarations of interest that people would like to make at the start of the meeting? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. Item 4 is the minutes of the meeting on the 13th of October 2022. Can I ask for a mover and a seconder that are true and accurate record of the proceedings? Thank you, Dr. Kumar. And the seconder, Councillor Guy. Today's date is there. Item 5 is announcements from the Chair or from the Chief Executive. I have 4 there this evening I'd like to make. Firstly, can I just thank the Royal British Legions for all their efforts in Bath and North East Somerset over the last week in arranging the events around Armistice Day and Remembrance Sunday, and obviously the Poppy Appeal. And thank you to all those councillors who are able to support their communities across the authority at those events. It's great to see the community coming together to recognise those who gave their lives for us. Item 2 that I want to talk about is just the thoughts and prayers of myself and the council to Alex Fletcher and his family at Bath City Football Club after the horrendous accident when they were playing at home the other week, and we just hope he makes a good recovery. My third item is just I attended last night, I chaired the Paris Liaison Committee meeting at Keynsham, and it was really good to see so many parish and town councils in our community engaged on the topic of the climate and ecological emergency. It was really good to see what the communities across North East Somerset are doing to boost our efforts as a race to make sure that we save this planet from man-made climate change. So that was fantastic. And finally, I'd just like to pass on my personal happy returns to both Councillor Joanna Wright and Councillor Grant Johnson for their birthdays today. So congratulations, and apologies, we have full council. Item 6 on the agenda is any urgent business, and there is none. Item 7 is items from the public, and this evening we have 6 speakers, and I believe Gordon McKay is the first one this evening.
Hello. We don't get many people visiting our town council meetings, but when they do, it's usually to complain about something, and I'm no different. Ever since I've been a town councillor for 6-7 years in Midsummer Norton, everybody comes to me and says, can you get something done about the traffic on Silver Street, which is a main pedestrian thoroughfare for people getting to several schools. And I have to respond and say, as a town councillor, we have nothing we can really do about highways. And on it goes and on it goes. And recently there was a new development in Silver Street, and I hoped some S16 money would be found to put a crossing in. I was disappointed to find out that it wasn't even really on the radar of highways. So I thought, I'll do something about it. So I got a petition together, which I've sent to you, which has been signed by over 100 people. And I've asked everybody what their thoughts on it. And they've come back to me and said, we really, really wish something could be done. It stops people walking the short distance to school. Simply to cross a road, there's a quarter-mile detour to get to the closest crossing. I don't think it's really good enough. It's interesting you talk about policy after policy trying to encourage people to use sustainable transport and climate emergency or crisis. I'm talking about people walking a quarter of a mile to school, and it's dangerous and it's scary. And that's linking secondary schools, primary schools and nursery schools. So I know this will go to highways and they'll say we've got priorities and budget constraints, but I would say this is your priority if you're serious about encouraging people to walk to school in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the group leaders in turn if they have any factual questions on the statement, and then I would ask Council to refer the statement to the relevant cabinet member. So, Councillor Guy.
Thank you, Chair. Would you be willing to meet the cabinet member for transport to discuss this item further?
Absolutely, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pritchard.
Yes, could I defer to Councillor Michael Evans, please?
Thank you, Gordon. Wonderful to see our fellow Mr Norton Town Councillor here with such a sensible proposition. Can I ask if you actually have any evidence to support the assertion that people are crying out for a crossing on Silver Street, where you suggest?
Yeah, I can actually. So the Mr Norton Town Council actually bought its own speed radar, and so it's not as official as our kind of highway speed radar, and it monitors the traffic. And I asked specifically...
Excuse me, Chair. Do you have the mic?
Sorry, my fault. Shall I repeat myself? So the Town Council bought its own little speed radar, so it's not like an official kind of police one, but it monitors the traffic. And it was placed just next to where the speed limit changes from 20 to 30 miles an hour, where most of the children need to cross. So it was obviously only recording in one direction, and I was kind of shocked. In 66 days, there was something like 250,000 traffic movements, which is huge. And almost 20% of the cars would be braking with 30 mile an hour speed limit, which is just unbelievable. And you know, we sort of talk about average speeds aren't that high, but actually when you look at the frequency of traffic, most cars are actually going extremely fast. And every day at school time, there will be several cars driving between 40 and 45 miles an hour.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Can I refer my factual question to Councillor Hughes?
Thank you for your statement, Gordon. And certainly, speeding vehicles is a growing concern in Mid Southern Norton. So would you be happy to meet up in the next couple of weeks and look at jointly putting forward a request to our highways for some highways improvements?
Absolutely, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moss.
Just to say that in my ward of Poulton, if pedestrian crossing is needed, the first port of call will be us as Baines councillors. Have you contacted your Baines councillor?
Do you know what, I have, and I've actually written to highways, I've contacted Baines councillors, and that's over a period of several years, and probably got to the point of just getting a little bit frustrated, so I thought I'd do this petition and try and broadcast my message to a wider group of people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your statement tonight, and I would invite Council to refer to the Cabinet Member responsible for transport to get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second public speaker we have this evening should have been David Wedgwell. Unfortunately, he's unwell, so we have Robbie Bentley to speak on his behalf.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council. I'm speaking on behalf of Dave Redwell. As many of you will now be aware, the West of England Combined Authority has got provision for powers over public transport within this region, and at the moment it is still very much a patchwork of policies, but as I understand it, there are a number of moves being made for officers to be provisioned within WECA who will eventually be assuming roles currently fulfilled by local and unitary authorities across the Bristol City region. And I wish to make the point that these people, decent as they've actually been doing for the work in each of our areas, are going to need to actually have some necessary understanding of what's actually going on across the wider region in order to begin the process of harmonising the transport policies at that greater level. Bath obviously has got a fairly decent public transport system, geographically limited as most other major and minor cities in this region are to where it can actually serve logistically by the bus operator, but also the fact that these people, some of whom are very, very dedicated and knowledgeable individuals, will need to actually be trained up to a greater level of understanding in order for powers to be released from Westminster, as well as from the 3 local authorities and possibly the 4th if North Somerset joins in the future, in order for Bristol, Old Bath and South Gloucestershire to be able to have an effectively run public transport system. As has been stated publicly today in the West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee meeting, we have a very good way of setting about in the set pieces, in things like sustainable transport solutions, and in other pieces is relating into small-scale projects, but we need to get ourselves better in open play, and we need to do this fast, because this region has been left behind because of its poor public transport provision, and this does need to change. I'd like to thank you for your time this evening, Chair and Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Councillor Guy, do you have any factual questions on the statement?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Would you like to pass on my regards to David, please? Thank you.
Of course.
Councillor Pritchard?
Thank you for your address, but no factual questions. Thank you.
Councillor Walker?
Thank you for your statement, but no factual questions.
And Councillor Moss?
Of course.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Thank you. Our next member of the public coming to speak tonight is Adam Reynolds, who's talking about active travel.
Last year, the council lost around 1 million in funding to improve walking and cycling in Bath and North East Somerset by failing to engage with community groups and local ward councillors, failing to refer back to the West of England Combined Authority Local Cycling Walking Infrastructure Plan. I'm going to call it LCWIP from going forward. And most importantly, failing to follow the Active Travel England's Active Travel Fund bid rules, also known as ATF. The ATF Tranche 4 bid submissions are due imminently, and with the budget today, they are guaranteed to happen, and could be worth up to 3 years of money. The LCWIP identifies 5 cycling and 2 walking routes in Bath, 3 cycling and 2 walking routes in Keynsham, and 3 cycling and 2 walking routes in the Somer Valley. Given that the LCWIP was authored before the introduction of the new National Cycling Design Guidance and the Active Travel Fund, some of the routes could never be implemented now, and many of the walking routes would be much better delivered as livable neighbourhoods. In August of this year, Active Travel England required Metro Combined Authorities and all highways authorities to submit active travel capability and ambition self-assessments that scored organisations on their political leadership, LCWIP maturity and schemes delivered. WECA scored a 2 and was allocated capability funding and will be allowed to bid for ATF Tranche 4 funding. Some of the highways authorities scored a 1 and will only be allowed to bid for very small schemes. And if you scored a 0, you have no access to the Active Travel Fund. Next year, Baines Highways Authority will be required to submit their own self-assessment and cannot hide its failings behind WECA. We are likely to lose access to millions in public realm improvements if you as councillors do not act. I would highly recommend that councillors take the time to walk along the ATF Tranche 2 Upper Bristol Road Phase 1 scheme. I would ask councillors to particularly look at the significant improvements to the pedestrian space. The majority of that £520,000 that has been spent has probably been spent on improving space for walking and wheeling and not actually cycling. So with Active Travel Fund Tranche 4 bids imminent,
The LCWIP up for rewrite by the end of 2023, and this administration's penchant for focusing only on Bath, what are Keynsham and Somer Valley councillors and Chew Valley councillors doing to ensure that they get their slice of the pie? In a time of austerity and massive cutbacks, this is pretty much your only access to funding for the next 1, 4 and 10 years. That's the space, that's the time window that ELSWIP works over to improve your ward. You can also ignore the Citizens Panel report, as it completely undermines the capability and ambition self-assessment. And if you do actually follow any of the recommendations that were provided by it, we'll lose the council millions in investment if ever taken seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for your statement. I'd like to now ask the group leaders in turn if they have any factual questions on the statement. Councillor Guy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Adam. No factual questions.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yes, thank you, Adam. I wonder, could you give further clarification on your lack of enthusiasm for the Citizens Panel report?
The Citizens Panel was done by Britain Thinks, who then commissioned a company that does rural surveys to recruit 27 people. Of those 27 people, not one of them was used active travel as their, or cycling as their primary form of transport, given the fact that and that's my interpretation, given the fact that when prompted for what their transport problems were, they had to be specifically asked about active travel to actually make it a problem. And also there was a really weird bias within it where there were 7 people with disabilities, which is fine, but how many of those were actually blue badge holders would have been a really important value to have in that. So I think what we have is we have some sort of unconscious bias within that report. And also critically, it was supposed to be a citizens jury, not a panel. And the jury is educated and expertise so they can make decisions. What actually happened with I believe why it was switched to a panel was because they weren't educated in national standard design approaches, and that's why they came to the conclusion, say on the 3 routes up the hill, that they couldn't be done as cycle routes purely because you couldn't get cycle lanes on there, and that wasn't necessary as part of the national design. So I don't feel it's in any way useful.
Thank you much for your full answer. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Adam, for your statement. There are no factual questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moss.
Yes, please could you clarify why you think the LC update is so important?
Because in 2019, when the LCWIP was done, it was done in a vacuum of nobody knowing what it was going to be used for, and so it was just kind of cobbled together with a couple of routes, and even Mark Shelf at the time that was involved in it wanted a much more different direction to it to be much more connected to schools. When it was then finally published, it sat there in a void. Along comes 2020, Boris Johnson gives £2 billion into walking and cycling through gear change, sets national design standards, and then sets up Active Travel England, and suddenly it becomes your business case for access to that £2 billion. And what we now have is we have a very disconnected sort of LCWIP with no real strategic network within it. And it should set out your 1, 4 and 10 year plans for cycling to detail at low level And so it's really critical that the next update that comes along has everything you think you want in your ward for the next 10 years fed into it.
Thank you for that response. Thank you very much for your statement this evening. I'm sure Cabinet members responsible will have heard what you stand to say. Thank you. Our next speaker tonight is Reverend Kenny Nelson.
Another Scotsman tonight, I hope you're feeling blessed. Thank you, Mr Chairman and members of the Council. I would like to speak to the issue tonight of the vacant Parkside building currently located in Charlotte Street car park. It's almost 4 years to the day when I first discovered that Parkside, then the Parkside Children's Centre, was set to be demolished to make way for additional short-stay car parking spaces. Recognising the contradiction of a clean air city looking to build more car parking, as well as the loss of this fantastic community asset, myself in my capacity as Minister of Bathyland Church in Charlotte Street, as well as a few others, campaigned to save the centre from demolition. Now, whether the decision to reverse the proposals was a direct result of that campaign or not, the building was indeed saved. Despite the fact that 4 years have passed, the only progress in this building is the northern portion has been converted for use by the street cleansing team, but the southern part now still lies completely empty. For additional context, the church have been actively working with the council and other partners and agencies across the city to try and occupy this building and breathe new life into it. And on 3 separate occasions, we've even been invited by the council to submit formal proposals, which we duly did. There is often much anticipation to the potential of these proposals, and at this stage I wish to acknowledge the support of our Kingsmead ward councillors, and in particular Councillor Craig, who is a constant source of encouragement to me. But, and there is a but, whenever we get to the point of formalising agreements, etc., the discussions move to a higher level while further deliberations take place somewhere which always lead nowhere. As time passes, the very fabric of the building, this wartime building, continues to be compromised. In the words of Bath Preservation Trust, the lack of occupancy will likely have a negative impact on the material integrity of this area of the building. They go on to recommend that the future of the southern portion of the building is opened up to Bath residents and local groups who might have a need or interest in this available space. So our current proposal is to bring a counselling hub and family centre as well as utilising this space for ad hoc community activities. It is very exciting and one that I know will breathe new life and wider hope into this asset. However, we cannot keep going round in circles, and so my ask of you, the council, is twofold. Firstly, decide as a matter of priority what is to happen to this space. And secondly, I implore you to please put this in the hands of the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Nelson. Councillor Guy, do you have any factual questions on the statement?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, very quickly, I'd like to thank Kelly for the reception yesterday. It was really good. My factual question is, though, would you like to meet myself with the relevant cabinet members to discuss your ideas further? Because I'm quite excited about the conversation we had yesterday, and I would appreciate a meeting.
Yes, certainly. We'd love that.
Councillor Pritchard.
Yes, thank you for your address, Reverend Nelson. I have no factual questions.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you for your statement, but no factual questions.
And Councillor Moss.
Thank you for the statement. What discussions have you had with property services and how productive and supportive have they been?
So as I said, the discussions seem to gather momentum and then they seem to stop. So I've discussed with community, I've discussed with property services. That's the most dynamic, latest discussion. However, it hasn't really gone anywhere thus far. I don't know why, but it hasn't gone anywhere thus far.
Thank you very much for your statements. And as you say, Councillor Guy, in contact with the guard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our penultimate speaker tonight, from the public, is Martin Guzzoni. And he's going to talk on a topic of Bath and business.
Thank you. 3 minutes, yeah? Okay.
Love to spend some time countering the concept of what a jury is consisted of, experts or otherwise. But anyway, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. I want to talk about this evening the oxygen of business that feeds our coffers with their taxes and their employees' taxes, attracting firms to work in a thriving, forward-looking, flexible, connected and innovative way in Bath, or maybe in some cases not. Just a bit of background. A local headline, Bath Business leads the way. Here's where this administration claimed Bath accounted for 21% of all new businesses in the whole southwest between 2020 and 21. However, that is wrong in my view. We actually, of the 55 constituencies in the southwest, 27 actually increased. Bath saw a 2% net increase, make it 9th in terms of percentage increase. So my point is we've got to be careful of how things are portrayed. Within that, an example of the sort of inefficiency I'm pointing out, the new South Quays development, 2 floors rented out, which is great. However, they're not paying rent until the footbridge opens, which beggars belief as far as I'm concerned. Discouragement. The proposed new Cat 6 charges, which is above and beyond the CAS requirements for 10 tonnes. Businesses in Bath have these big trucks. They've been given incentives to buy them, and now they're going to be charged for them. So they're being knocked back. That can't be good.
Business parking, an increase of 148%. Are you encouraged yet? They've asked me, when I've gone around speaking to them, why aren't you listening to the business community? A full-time inner ring of steel, which was not called for by the police, with no easy access for boot badge holders and businesses, but free overnight access for anyone wanting it. No outer ring, which was called for by the police, albeit on call. So, bad for security and bad for access to those that need it. A stated aim, as I understand it, to reduce the number of visitors to Bath in cars by 25%. If you make things more difficult, much like recycling, they will just go elsewhere. 20-mile-an-hour zones, which are needed in some places, but I was going down the London road today at 20 miles an hour, and I do just wonder, that wasn't, as I understand it, called for in manifestos, and I just get the feeling that there's challenges there in terms of increased emissions and increased time to get around for businesses. I accept there are two sides to the argument there. Hospitality is up, but that's not the same as retail, which is very down. The council owns a lot of empty properties. They could help hospitality staff, for example. No money available, we're told, but that just means no rent. As for retail, the number of empty shops in Bath now is legion. 17 I counted today, just in a few streets.
Could you draw your remarks?
I can, yes, thank you. If you fancy a Baines repairing lease, or perhaps move to Swindon.
Thank you.
So I'll just finish off by saying thank you. Too much time chasing an emissions free zone, you'll end up with a business free zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Guy, do you have any factual questions on the statement?
I can think of lots of questions, Chair, but I have no factual questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pritchard, do you have any factual questions?
Thank you, Mr. Puzzoni. A whole series of questions
You have
there, but I will refrain from asking any at the moment.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you for your statement, but no factual questions.
And Councillor Moss. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you. Our final speaker this evening is Matt Cooper, who's going to talk about renewable energy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council. Bath NES states on its website that the climate emergency it declared in 2019 is a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce or halt climate change and avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. Last week, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, warned, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. Urgent action is required. Time is of the essence." Can nuclear help? Not according to a Greenpeace article titled 6 Reasons Why Nuclear Energy is Not the Way to a Green and Peaceful World. Of the 6 reasons, 3 are pertinent when it comes to taking urgent action to address climate change. Nuclear energy is too expensive, too slow, and delivers too little to matter in terms of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Too expensive, too slow, delivers too little. So we can put a big red cross against nuclear as an option for tackling climate change. But can we also put a green tick against renewables? I'm pleased to say that we most definitely can. Further to Professor Mark Barrett's modelling on the cost of nuclear, I'd like to draw your attention to a study published in the journal Energy and Environmental Science, co-written by Professor Mark Jacobson of Stanford University, titled Low-Cost Solutions to Global Warming, Air Pollution and Energy Insecurity for 145 Countries. The study claims all the countries examined, including the UK, could switch to 100% renewable energy in a few years using technologies available today. Professor Jacobson said, "We do not need miracle technologies to solve these problems. By producing electricity from clean, renewable sources, we can create safe, cheap and reliable energy everywhere. It will mean a net increase in job numbers. It will reduce illnesses and deaths caused by fossil fuel air pollution. It will enhance global energy security. It will slash greenhouse gas emissions." What's the catch? The cost of making the changeover to 100% renewable energy in those 145 countries is estimated at a staggering $62 trillion. But here's the thing. Jacobson and his team say the savings made from this transition mean those costs would be paid back in just 6 years. I would ask you to reflect again on the urgency of action required and the desperate need for bold leadership. In the last week, France passed a law that within 5 years, all car parks with more than 80 spaces must be covered by solar panels. That is bold climate leadership. Please show the people of Bath and North East Somerset bold leadership by pushing Westminster not only to back renewables, but to go further and faster with genuine urgency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. Councillor Guy, do you have any factual questions?
I have no factual question, Chair, but I'm more than happy to put pressure on the government for more renewables.
Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. No factual questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, statement, but no factual questions.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Moss. Thank you very much. And obviously we're discussing that item and item 13 on the agenda, so you're more than welcome to stay and to listen to the debate. Thank you. So that concludes all our public speakers this evening, so we'll move on to the first paper of the night, and it's item 8, which is the Equalities Improvement Action Plan, and I'd like to invite Councillor Romero to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's biannual Corporate Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Steering Group, which is chaired by the Chief Executive, agreed at its first meeting on the 3rd of November 2020 that the Council should measure its equality progress against the Equality Framework for Local Government, setting targets for improvement where needed. This audit was reviewed at the Strategy Group on the 24th of November 2021, and an improvement plan was agreed. And the improvement plan gives the Council strategic direction in its equality work, and at the same time includes the actions that we need to take in order to meet the agreed targets. The EIP was considered on the 26th of September by the Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel, and I'm sure as chair of that panel, Councillor Wellington will be pleased to have seen that the suggested amendments have been incorporated, such as the additional column for RAG rating. The objectives of the Equality Improvement Action Plan include corporate oversight, ongoing reflective practice of each directorate with a focus on equalities, monitoring progress and staff networks. And these are in place. And I would like to add a small addition, which is to continue to support the community in the development of groups for people with protected characteristics, including LGBTQ+. As I'm sure you will all appreciate, this paper is a distillation of the work being done by both the Council and by community-led groups, each with a focus on different protected characteristics, and these are very much live works in progress. For those of you who might have missed them, here are a few of the highlights of the Equality Improvement Action Plan. Within demonstrating leadership and partnership working, we have a live race charter, and regular meetings are in place, and this provides ongoing resources for schools, for example, for online training on hate crime, and also conversation guidance around key actions. Procurement, so the Ethnic Minority Staff Network Chair is supporting this to offer advice, guidance, and also challenge. In training, development and support, staff network groups have proactive chairs who are planning to create a collective advisory forum, and consideration is being given to implementing service equality champions. New performance systems will enable oversight and accountability for the completion of EQIAs as part of evidence-based practice and legislative compliance. I am sure all here will be very interested in the areas of development, and also we want to note that the delay in census data and how that is impacting on our ability to set data-informed targets. However, areas of work that are current are addressing the gaps in employee data, increasing the number and quality of completed and published EQIAs, service managers to identify and capture equality-related issues early, such as within the medium-term financial strategy, a systematic approach to identifying corporate and cumulative effects of policy development and service changes on people with protected characteristics, develop staff competencies in the completion of EQIAs, updated budget templates, service procurement templates, and other updated templates which are accessible through the website. As I'm sure you will appreciate, with such a detailed report, I can't highlight absolutely everything, so I will instead conclude with a reminder of what Council is being asked to do tonight, which is to agree the performance of the Council is measured against the highlighted performance indicators, adopt the Equality Improvement Plan as part of Council policy and practice, and to note that Corporate Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Steering Groups is responsible for ensuring delivery on the EIP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Romero. I believe Councillor Warrington, you were second.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to second this report. Both as I've seen this as part of the Corporate Scrutiny Panel and also a member of the CEDIS. I think I can speak on behalf of the rest of the panel that we were somewhat impressed by this certainly the WAG system and the table with all the tasks that are very clearly laid out, very easy to read, and we have a WAG system that is visual that will immediately flag up the red areas that are the high-risk areas. And as Councillor Romero has mentioned, one of the suggestions that came forward from that meeting was to add another column so that we could actually measure each of those tasks and we could hopefully see that way forward. So I recommend this report and can only reiterate what Councillor Romero has said, and we ask you to agree the performance of the Council measured against the highlighted performance indicators, and that we adopt this EIP as part of the Council policy and practice. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warrington. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair.
It does seem a little bit ironic that we should have this report immediately after the public speakers, when sadly, among, I don't know who the speakers are, is monitored as part of this exercise, but there always seems to me to be a disproportionate number of males speaking as opposed to females. And at Cabinet, I drew your attention to the fact we have all these bewigged white men surrounding us, that it perhaps has a negative effect on women who feel unrepresented here. And I hope that in June next year we will have a much more diverse membership, even though I do think we have considerably improved on when I was first elected. It's a very good report, most interesting, and I read it very carefully, but I did get that sort of feeling I perhaps ought to be wearing homespun cotton like Gandhi, because somebody asked Gandhiji, what did he think of English democracy? And he said, well, it would be a very good idea if it was actually tried. There are some very good ideas in this report, but we need to know that they are actually being tried. And speaking as an older person, I mean, what I really like about this report is the way it integrates the different departments of council work and integrates them with bodies such as the Health and Wellbeing Board. This is excellent to have a view across the whole board. But there is one singular thread missing, and that is the situation of older people who are very often discriminated against in the health service nationally. I don't know what the figures are for the RUH about the denial of advanced breast cancer treatment to older women, which is something which has emerged as a national figure. But very often older people, particularly because they may not be on the internet, are not getting the kind of opportunities which they deserve. Finally, of course, there is another discriminatory suspicion that I have. I think it's most unfortunate, given how highly intelligent and active the Labour group is, that there is no Labour member either in any of these bodies dealing with equalities, and I do hope this will be rectified after the next election, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Dr. Kumar.
Thank you very much, Chair. I highly appreciate and acknowledge the work done by the panel, and in fact, a couple of years ago, we also started the REST panel and everything, so I appreciate that work. But as Councillor Jackson very appropriately says, there needs to be a bit of more improvement, and I will just cite two examples very, very quickly. One is that one of our residents has been asking for equality impact assessments on entry, hill and high common leisure facilities, and he has been asking for that for many months, and we have been not gathering equality data for that, and it looks not very good. And second is my own personal experience. Chair, I have translated a book in English, Hindi, and Bengali. When I offered my own book of Hindi, which was published this year, to Bard University, my own library, they gladly accepted it. But when I offered this to the Central Library by Baines, they said, we will be very happy to accept the English edition, Chair, but not the Hindi or Bengali edition. Now, in Baines Council, I do not want to go into the data. There are over 1,800 people, and there are some people who just cannot read even English, and they are very senior citizens. I did not become angry or disappointed. I did not reply for about 2 months, to be honest. But finally, I did raise this matter and copied it to the CEO sitting over here, and then they have accepted it yesterday. So I think there is a need of improvement, and I'm sure everybody will agree to that. That's all I wanted to make these 2 comments, but I thank you for the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dr. Kumar. There are no other people who have indicated to speak, and therefore I suggest we move to the vote on the recommendations put forward by Councillor. Oh, would you like to sum up? I do apologise.
Well, I was only going to thank Councillor Kumar and Councillor Jackson for their comments, and obviously they'll be taken on board. But now you can move to the vote.
Thank you. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendations as printed? Yep. Thank you very much. Those against? There are none. And any abstentions? There are none, so it's carried unanimously, so thank you very much. Item 9 on the agenda. Councillor Romero, I believe you're introducing this item as well.
I am, thank you, Chair. So the terms of reference before you have been updated in light of changes in legislation and in reflection of the wider integrated health and social care context. The Health and Wellbeing Board has statutory functions which we will, of course, carry out. But the key issues we want to focus on are inequalities, and I hope you will see this is a thread running through these new terms of reference. We also wanted to make sure this board had ownership by all of its stakeholders and partners, which include Healthwatch, 3SG, as well as the board having meaningful purpose with the integrated care system. We want to maximise the potential and contributions for all our partners so that addressing inequalities becomes a call for actual action rather than a heading in yet another report. Critical to success will be building community resilience, alongside that buy-in from the community's stakeholders and partners. The board is made up of members of the community through Healthwatch, our main social housing provider, Curo, 3SG, the ICS, the RUH, and of course the council. So the terms of reference have been examined by these and all the members of the board, and are now presented to council for approval, and I hope you will all be able to support the terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Romero. I'd like to invite Councillor Pritchard to second the motion.
Yes, in my capacity as chairman of the Children, Adults, Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Panel, I'm very happy to second this proposal. I'll leave it at that.
I have seen no one indicating to speak, so Councillor Romero, would you like to sum up before we move to the vote?
I don't need to.
Can I see all those in favour, please? All those against? And any abstentions? Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously. Item 10 on the agenda is the Treasury Management Performance Report to the 30th of September 2022. And Councillor Samuel, would you like to move the motion?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm pleased to introduce the second regular Treasury Management Report for Council this year. The last one was received, as you recall, at the budget setting meeting in February. Just to refresh for members, the Council follows the SIPFA Treasury Management Code and sets the strategy and indicators at that budget meeting in February, and we'll be doing again the same in February next year. The report reviews performance against indicators and confirms that all performance is within target levels. Members may wish to note a few things. The LIBOR indicator that we've used for many years has now been changed to the SONIA indicator, and for those who are curious, it's the Sterling Overnight Index average. Don't ask me to explain the technical difference between the two, but it's a different indicator. Council borrowing has reduced by about £1 million over the last 6-month period through PWLB repayments, principally on loans that we held. And we hold 64 million currently as investment funds, diversified, as you all know, as is our practice, across a range of funds to spread risk, of which £5 million is now held specifically in ESG-focused funds. The overall return on investment we've been receiving is 1.32%, slightly higher than the benchmark indicator that we set earlier this year. And the general increase in interest rates means that while an increase in returns on investment may be expected, borrowing rates will also rise. So I am conducting a review of the capital programme at the moment, which will feed into the budget report in February as to whether any of our schemes can be paused or rephased to reduce future revenue costs on the general fund. Otherwise, the Council's borrowing remains within the set limits that we previously approved. We continue to hold £15 million to cover any short-term calls on liquidity in recognition of the current volatile market conditions that have existed over the past couple of years. Finally, members may find the Arlene Close market summary useful. It is worth a read, although to some extent it has been overtaken by a much more comprehensive view of the economy going forward by the Office of Budget Responsibility published today. You may have had trouble getting hold of it because their website crashed because so many people were looking at it. But that is worth a read, and it is, I'm afraid, a rather depressing view forward of the economy, which anticipates that living standards will fall over the next 5 years. In fact, the greatest fall experienced by this country since the 1950s. So, members, with that, I move the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Samuel. Can I invite Councillor Elliott to second?
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat the very good points made by Councillor Samuel, just to say that whilst the overall financial conditions are obviously very difficult at the moment, the indicators given in the report all show that our investments are well looked after and our fundamental underlying finances are robust. I'd like to thank the officers for the time they spend reporting back to both Corporate PDS and Corporate Audit Committee. Their reports are always very well presented. The officers always are knowledgeable and informative, and I know they've been responsive to suggestions from my colleague Lucy Hodge, Councillor Lucy Hodge, about further ways to improve the clarity of presentation in the report. Very grateful to them for that. I'm very happy to second.
Thank you very much. I have seen no one indicating to speak. So, Councillor Wright, apologies.
Thank you to officers for this in-depth financial report. At July's full council, the Green Party abstained on the Treasury Management Outline Report and raised some issues that are causing us some worry, in particular to the lender option borrow option, LOBO loan, of which there was in July a LOBO borrowing of 10 million. The Liberal Democrat administration stated they were going to pay off this LOBO loan, but the bank increased the interest rates. The Green Party would still like to know why this decision has been made. With regard to the Treasury management to the end of September, it says that the Council is borrowing 217 million at 2 to 5% interest to invest 87 million at 1.32% returns. That makes no economic sense whatsoever. In particular, we're borrowing 17 million at 4 to 5% interest, including 20 million in LOBOs. It appears we are borrowing money at one rate to invest at a lower rate. Why is the Council doing this? However, it appears we cannot pay off these loans without incurring a penalty. This holds even for the LOBOs, as long as the lender doesn't change the interest rate, which they may do every 6 months. This seems like a very bad economic situation that is not sustainable at a time when we are facing further cuts from government and further austerity. In Appendix 6, it shows that the Council is still paying 4.2 annually in costs for the financial situation we have. This table is misleading since it has costs in black and gains in red. It should be the other way around. The current international situation is unsurprisingly leading to a serious increase in interest rate risk and inflation risk, as set out in Appendix 8. This is likely to worsen, but it would again appear that the Council has no other plans than to monitor the situation and look at for some possible alternatives. What is the plan to get out of this? It would appear that the only positive action that Council could take in the immediate moment are with regard to the 5 million Portsmouth loan that's due next month, plus the 20 million in LOBOs, where the interest rate may increase arbitrarily every 6 months. So it would appear that the Council needs to have 25 million ready to pay these off. There is presently 40 million in cash and another 24 million in other short-term money. So there's plenty to cover this, but from this report it is impossible to tell how badly this would affect the liquidity situation. Or again in July, I suggested that the Council does have a large amount of liquidity, which is presently not invested. If the Council did, for instance, put 25 million into investments, they could be generating a healthy return for taxpayers of approximately 1 million. Again, although I do value this report and update, it would really be good to have a better information put before Council on the important matters of finances. Further, with regards to the real threat to the bird population from the impact of highly pathogenic avian influenza and the recent death of swans locally, it is clear that the Council does have a significant public health role in implementing measures to minimise the possible impact. What will the Council be doing in terms of finances to cover this expense? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no other speakers indicated. So, Councillor Samuel, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll just correct my omission for not thanking the finance team for producing this report and introducing it. And I'll just refer to Councillor Wright's comments there in her speech. I think it would be helpful, actually, if you could set some of these down in writing to me, and I will see if we can address them. I'm afraid the large number of requests that you covered in your 3 minutes there, it's beyond my ability to write them down. So I think, as I don't want to miss anything, I would invite you to write to me, and I'll make sure that you get an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Councillor Samuels has summed up. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendations as printed in the report? Thank you very much. And all those against? And any abstentions? There's one abstention. Thank you very much. That's carried. Item 11 on the agenda is Avon Pension Fund Annual Report. I'd like to invite Councillor Cosley to move the recommendations in the paper.
Thank you very much. And before I start talking about this report, I'd like to thank very much all our staff who manage the pensions on behalf of us and others, as you'll find out soon. I'd like to thank all the members of the various committees, and can I tell you, any of you looking for jobs after the next election, the pensions is very worthwhile, but it has far more meetings than any other part of the council. And I'd like to thank all our external advisors who support and advise us and give a fantastic job in return. This is the annual report to Council from the Avon Pension Fund Committee for the year of 31 March 2022. During the last 12 months, I'm pleased to say that the fund has once again delivered a high level of service to over 130,000 members and over 450 employers. Our first priority is to meet our obligations to our pensioners and to provide pensions now and in the future. Some highlights I'd like to share. 1. We agreed to a new operating model for the administration to drive greater digitalisation of service delivery and to increase resilience of the service as the membership continues to grow and fragment. An improvement plan is in place to build resources and capability, which will take time to implement. 2, it was another year of strong investment returns that added 525 million to the fund value, which meant that at year end the fund had achieved 100% funding value. 3, we increased our alignment to the net zero transition by investing 575 million or a quarter of our equities in a Paris-aligned global equity fund. 4, we set new intermediate climate targets to help monitor our transition flight path. Targeting is probably a bad word, that one. Targeting a 43% reduction in absolute emissions by 2025 and 69% by 2030 compared to a 2019 baseline. 5, we continue to make progress decarbonising the portfolio. In 2021, our equity portfolios had a 6% reduction in absolute carbon emissions and a 24% reduction in carbon intensity over the previous year. And finally, by focusing on reducing absolute emissions and aligning our investments with the transition pathways, we will impact real-world carbon emissions rather than just on paper. Therefore, we remain invested in some high-carbon assets that are either developing climate solutions or have decarbonisation strategies that are aligned to the net zero transition. An example of this is Ørsted, an oil and gas company that has redirected its capital expenditure to renewables and now has a very low carbon footprint. Since March, however, there has been significant volatility in the markets, driven by the end of low interest rates and the rise in inflation. The fund's diverse portfolio and robust risk management strategy means it is resilient in this deteriorating economic environment. However, this has caused the funding level to decline since 31st March, which is reflected in the 2022 triennial valuation results for all our employers. Finally, I'm very pleased to announce that Avon Pension Fund has been shortlisted by the Local Authority Pension Fund Investment Award in the category for Best Climate Strategy. In addition, it was cited in a report by the Institutional Investors Group on climate change as an example of how we have embedded climate criteria in our cash and risk management strategies. Both are a testament to the progress the fund continues to make to ensure that we can meet both our investment and climate objectives. I so move the Council are asked to note the committee's annual report to Council and to note the Pension Board's annual report as provided in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crossley. I believe Councillor Shern, you're going to second.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have great pleasure in actually seconding this report. Thank you.
I have seen no one indicating to speak. Councillor Crossley, do you need to add anything to sum up? No. Thank you very much. Therefore, we'd like to move to the vote on the recommendations in 2.1 and 2.2. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you very much. Anyone against? And any abstentions? That's another unanimous one. Thank you very much. Item 12 on the agenda is the Charitable Trust Board Annual Report, and I believe Councillor Wood would like to move the recommendations.
Yes, I'm pleased to move item 12, the Charitable Trust Board Annual Report. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our support officers and the members of the Alice Park Subcommittee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Appleyard, I believe you would like to second.
I second the report.
I haven't seen anyone indicating they would like to speak. Councillor Wood, do you need to sum up?
Move to the vote.
Thank you very much. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendation to note the report? That's unanimous again. Thank you very much. We'll carry on. There was a comfort break now, but if people are happy to carry on. Yeah. Item 13 is a motion from Councillor Wright on supporting renewable energy. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I am delighted once again to bring to full Council the motion on renewables versus nuclear. I am pleased that councillors have further contributed to this motion on why the government should stop backing nuclear over renewables. Firstly, I would ask that we take a moment to remember the death of a construction worker this week who died at Hinkley Point nuclear site, and I'm sure every councillor would like to extend their condolences to the family. For information, Hinkley Point is due to open in June 2027 at the cost of $26 billion. It began being built in 2017. Matt Cooper has succinctly explained the thrust of this motion. When it comes to taking urgent action to address the climate emergency, nuclear energy is too expensive, too slow, and delivers too little to matter in terms of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. But the present Conservative government, only today as we know, is determined to deliver new UK-wide small nuclear modular reactors, and only last month put out a press release on the deal struck for the development of a new-scale nuclear project in North Wales. The government is investing whole-scale in nuclear at a cost to renewables, at a cost of time to deliver on the climate emergency, and worryingly failing to understand the cost to public health. The motion clearly explains that the finances for nuclear energy are wrong, backed by professors who have modelled why financially they prove it is a major error. We are all too aware of the issues of the climate emergency and how we are now at a precipice, but what fails to be reported and acknowledged is the huge cost to our health and our landscape that nuclear energy creates. The nuclear fuel cycle is murderously filthy, imparting long-lasting contamination on an epic scale. Nuclear begins by mining for uranium, often on the land of indigenous people, contaminating the earth in the process and leaving radioactive slag heaps for future generations to deal with. The creation of nuclear power plants where this uranium will be used requires fossil fuel-intensive, carbon-emitting vehicles and products to create them, embedding enormous amounts of carbon into these nuclear sites. The uranium mined for the reactors must be enriched as energy-intensive process that requires the energy of coal-fired plants. For example, in the USA, it took 4 coal-fired plants to operate 2 uranium enrichment sites. All the uranium could be reprocessed instead, an experiment that took place in Sellafield, which led to contamination and leaks and had to be shut down. The fallout at Sellafield means that for generations to come, the public purse will have to pay a high price for this ongoing contamination containment. The accidents created by nuclear are so many in number, from 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl to Fukushima, that means Wall Street won't invest in nuclear power because it is too risky and the clean-up bill is too high. We do know that nuclear impacts on the public health, from leukemia in children, Hodgkin's disease, lymphoma, cancer, and birth defects. So the question I would put to you, councillors, is, would you want a small nuclear modular reactor in your ward? There is plenty of space for a nuclear reactor by the golf course in Salford, or we could go with Pensford or West Hertfordshire, or a bit closer to Bath in Peasdown St John, or right on the River Avon at Barthampton Meadows. If your answer is no, I would not want a nuclear reactor in my ward, then I urge you to support this motion and tell the government that they must rethink their energy strategy and invest in renewables, which have clearly been shown to be safe to public health, deliverable in the short term and cost effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. I believe Councillor McCabe, you're seconding.
Yes, I'm seconding the motion as agreed and not as it appears in the agenda, which is the original motion. So first of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Pritchard, who agreed with me at the last full council meeting that ideally this should come back in a form that we could all agree because it's so important. But in the same way, I'd also like to thank Councillor Wright for her patience and Councillor Moss for graciously allowing me to second. In the agreed motion, you'll see that the National Grid, well, the first point is the National Grid now believes it can get to 100% low carbon sources of electricity by 2035. The balance there is 80% renewables and 20% nuclear. Now that's changed from before lockdown, when they thought they would still need, they thought they would still need 5% gas, i.e. they'd need something they could turn on when demand spiked. But clearly world events have forced a rethink, and our dependence on foreign imported gas is being addressed by dropping that bit. Unfortunately, we've also seen in the meantime, before we can go on this journey to net zero, that the government has allowed a rush for fossil fuels from under the North Sea, whilst we wait for new nuclear to come on stream, because we still need something we can switch on. And therein lies the problem, because National Grid foresees the point at which prolonged cloudy skies, no wind, and you're going to need to switch something on if there's a peak of demand. And what we haven't seen yet is how the government is going to support renewables and storage to actually start to reduce that risk. Because nuclear is, as Councillor Wright has pointed out, mind-blowingly expensive, and that cost will appear on all our household bills. So over a long period of time, all our bills will go up to support this 20% nuclear. So despite today's announcement, I think it's still worth, point one, calling on the government to review approvals. I think we can all predict what the outcome will be. We have done, and we've decided to go ahead, but I think it's still worth asking them to renew because of the controversy. I think it's worth keeping on top of these decisions. But it's quite clear that renewables are providing the cheapest form of electricity, and we want to hear from the government about their strategy for the enormous expansion that's needed. I've run out of time. I wanted to talk about Ofgem pulling the plug on the cost of reinforcing the grid, but I hope everyone feels that the motion as it's written is now supportable. Thank you.
I haven't seen anyone. Councillor Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to talk about the context. I think most of you have taken a transatlantic flight or 8-hour flight in your life, or eaten 100 grams, only 100 grams of Brazilian nuts, only 100 grams. They have more capacity of radiation than living beside a new nuclear plant. I'm not saying, and I'm not making it up, this is from the government website. The UN's International Atomic Energy Agency have declared that nuclear power plants are among the safest and most secure facilities in the world. I'm not against clean energy at all. In fact, I'm much more in support. But today, because of unforeseen circumstances, the mad Putin's attack, the energy security issues, in our country, we need to be more self-reliant. And as I have said earlier, just 2 points, that the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, in which there are hundreds of very senior researchers, after empirical research, they have written that report. So they are basically secure facilities, and we should not be completely against nuclear energy. That's my point. Thank you.
Apologies, I didn't have my microphone. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. As we know, this item was deferred from the last council meeting with the aspiration of returning as a cross-party motion. We are very disappointed that this did not happen. We wanted very much to be involved and have the opportunity to sit down with other parties and scrutinise the data being provided, working together to achieve something that everybody had an input into and a full understanding of the motion. This did not happen. We independents were not involved. Therefore, we will be abstaining this evening.
Thank you much, Councillor Walker. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. If you forgive me, I happen to be sat opposite Councillor Richard Samuel, and I just have to say how good it is to see him back in his place. I remember him particularly coming down to Mr. Norton, taking the trouble to see a problem we have with property services, which I'm pleased to say has been solved, and the Garden of Friendship, which you looked at, is now much more accessible to the community. So thank you for that. We're all in favour of clean and renewable energy, and our country is leading the way. In 2010, we got 75% of our energy from fossil fuel, just taking that date at random, of course. Now it is 35%. We're doing very well, and we shall do even better. But while we do this, we have to be aware of the absolute need to keep reliable energy supply available at all times. Our civilization, our lives, our children's lives depend on it. There are two fundamental principles to guide us as we transfer to renewable energy. One is independence, which we've been made vividly aware of by the ghastly Putin invasion of Ukraine, of course. We will be irresponsible indeed to make ourselves dependent on foreign powers like Germany is on Russia, or ourselves tend to be on France or Norway. Secondly, we must prepare to be resilient in the face of not only known knowns like Putin, as he now is, but also unknown knowns. The future is uncertain. It's unpredictable. We may be hit by other situations, extreme droughts or lack of wind, which have already been mentioned, and others which are by definition unknown. The best way of preparing for being resilient in the face of the unknown unknowns is to have a multiplicity of energy sources to call on. Becoming reliant on one single sort of source like renewable would be irresponsible. We need sun, wind, water renewables. We also need some fossil fuels, as Germany is very grateful it hasn't got rid of all its coal-fired plants at the moment. We need capacity like the liquid petroleum storage which we have, which is saving our skins at the moment to a large extent, being able to produce a lot of liquid petroleum gas from the United States. The US isn't totally reliable either. We do need to be independent. Nuclear power, safe, much safer than coal, which has killed many thousands of people, of course, in mining it, safer than all the other sources, really. It's under our own control, it's reliable, it's an essential element in the future mix. That's why it's difficult to support the proposition as it's been made at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. I see no other councillors wishing to indicate to speak. No, so therefore I'd like to move back to Councillor Wright as the mover of the motion to summate.
Thank you, Chair. As I said in my introduction, Wall Street won't invest in nuclear power because it is too risky and the clean-up bill too high. Only today, the government has invested public taxpayers' money of $700 million into the Sizewell B nuclear site. The chances of getting private funding for this are limited because, again, they don't want to take the risk. I was very kindly, generously given a happy birthday. On this day when I was born, many years ago, in the bed next to me, where my mother gave birth, was another baby born, and that baby had 6 fingers. I was born right by Dounreay, and the outcome for many of the young people born in that area has been health issues that have been noticeable and sizable over many generations and registered. So the fact that it does not affect public health is not true. I go back to the real issue, though, that we need to deliver energy quickly, and we have a climate emergency. The quickest and the cheapest way to do that was with renewables, and this government should be investing in that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright, for that. So we now move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as put? Okay. Thank you very much. And all those against? And all those abstaining?
Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Now we move on to item 14 on the agenda, which is a motion from Councillor Wright on proportional representation.
Thank you, Chair. Democracy in the Oxford Dictionary means a system of government by the whole population or the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. As a Green Party member, I have a clear interest for wanting proportional representation. Our present system of first past the post fails to deliver seats for the Green Party at a local level and at a national level. In 2019, it took roughly 38,000 votes to elect each Tory MP and 50,000 for each Labour, but 850,000 votes to get just one Green MP into Parliament. Clearly, my bias for the Greens is clear, but the Electoral Reform Society only this week reported on the difference between the Welsh elections run under first past the post and the Scottish local elections run under the proportional single transferable vote. The Electoral Reform Society found that in over a third of councils in Wales, a party holds more than 50% of the seats on less than 50% of the vote. Shockingly, more than 100,000 voters in Wales had their choice taken away from them as there was only one candidate standing in 74 seats. First past the post makes elections so uncompetitive it simply isn't worth challenging the incumbent. The picture in Scotland was significantly better, with voters given a real choice. The UK, the home of parliamentary democracy, is now lagging behind most democracies and the vast majority of developed countries, as countries around the world use some form of proportional representation for their general elections. So what are the arguments against proportional representation? We've already had a referendum on PR. The British people have never had a say on proportional representation. Nobody cares about PR. Every opinion poll carried out by a member of the British Polling Council since May 2015 has found overwhelmingly support for PR. PR would weaken the link between MPs and constituents. Under first past the post, everyone has a single local MP, but for millions of people, this is someone who they profoundly disagree with. In South Down, for example, 68% of voters did not vote for the winning candidate in 2019. PR would lead to weak, unstable coalition governments and constant elections. Most developed democracies use PR and have coalition governments, including Germany, Norway and Sweden, and these have been proven to be a very effective way of governing. There are other points I could list, including how PR shines a light on extremist views, or how there is no evidence that PR is too complicated, expensive or bureaucratic. Our democracy should be fairly representing the views of the people. Our first past the post fails repeatedly to represent the views of the people. As a country, we pride ourselves on our strong commitment to democracy, yet the vast majority of votes cast up and down the land simply do not count. In many general elections, huge number of votes make no difference to the outcome, and people regularly say it is not worth voting because their vote makes no difference. It is deeply worrying that what our outdated dysfunctional electoral system is doing to the legitimacy of our government system. A system that is not only failing the political parties and failing to deliver effective government, it is failing the citizens of this country. Robin Cook understood all this when back in 2005 he said, and I quote, "Our objective, our slogan should be to achieve an electoral system which puts our democracy in the hands of the many voters, not the few who happen to be key in marginal seats." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Councillor Mallory.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Councillor Wright very much for proposing this motion. I completely agree with her that we need to change our voting system from the first past the post to proportional representation. We need a voting system that more accurately reflects the voices or views of the electorate than the current system does. Make Votes Matter, I have a t-shirt here, can you see? Make Votes Matter, is a national campaign that believes members of the House of Commons should be elected by proportional representation. This is their focus. But once achieved, the aim is to extend proportional representation to elections at all levels of government, including local councils such as our own. By the way, if you aren't already aware, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales will use PR voting systems. which leads to a fair representation of the citizens. There are different systems of PR, but they're all better than what we have with first past the post, because it's basically as soon as you have more than 2 candidates, it's unfair. And I was just going to point out also the Electoral Reform Society has a very good website with a very informative page with descriptions of all the different systems of proportional representation and voting systems and the countries in which they're used. And so I recommend you have a look at that. One of the reasons for suggesting an amendment to this motion.
Is Councillor Malloy seconding this motion, or is she proposing an amendment? Because that was not made clear. So at the moment, unless you are seconding...
Councillor Malloy is seconding the motion. I knew she was seconding.
Right.
Apologies, I called her name without saying that she was seconding. I apologise for that.
So I'm seconding it, and I'm supporting the motion. My addition to it was that to make a distinction basically between the 2 MPs that we have, Vera Hobhouse, MP for Bath, a true Liberal Democrat who's been pushing it for proportional representation for many years, and is also incidentally the Secretary of the Electoral Reform All-Party Parliamentary Group in Westminster. And I think that it's important to mention that because as a model, it provides a good model of cross-party collaborative working, which I believe a PR voting system would foster. A different style of politics is possible, I believe, and with PR that would come about more cooperation, more collaboration, and more consensus decision making. That's what I believe. So we'd like to thank Vera for all the work that she's done on this over the years. And I would like to urge Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP for North East Somerset, to think about it carefully, because it will also have benefits for all parties, including his own. So I urge both MPs to call for further debate and consideration of proportional representation as the fairest way to elect political representatives at all levels of government in the UK, including England. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those councillors who aren't aware, there was an updated motion with the suggested amendment, which was accepted by Councillor Wright, which has been circulated. I have now Councillor Moss, then Councillor Hurst.
Thank you very much. I'm more than happy to be supporting this resolution. But don't really want to get into a debate about the different sorts of PR. I've had Grant whisper in my ear for the last couple of minutes about whether there's this system and that system. But going back, I mean, Joanna actually mentioned that quote from Robin Cook from the Noughties about how the power should be in the hands of the majority and not just a few. And we can have a debate about which particular sort of PR system would work best. But what you've got to do to start with is to make sure that people can vote. And if we look at what happened in the States over the last few weeks, we saw very clearly that a lot of young people came out and voted. They voted very clearly as a majority for the Democratic Party. And we've seen a response in some right-wing media outlets of, well, clearly they're stupid. What we need to do is to raise the voting age. And that's a very clear strand within the Republican Party across the states of voter suppression. But of course that couldn't happen here, could it? Actually, that is exactly what is happening here at the moment, with the legislation being put forward by the current Conservative government. What we're seeing is the proposal that what people should be having is some kind of paper proof of ID when you go to a polling station. And of course, the younger you are, the less likely you are to actually have paper bills, paper proof of ID, the more likely you are to actually have online bills and online communications. And I think what we should be doing, certainly as a Baines Council, is first of all making sure that people register to vote, so they're actually on the register to start with. to encourage as many people as possible to register for postal voting, because that cuts out that's in the initial stages, means you provide the proof so you actually get a postal vote. But to make sure that people know that when they turn up at a polling station next May, that they've got the right proof of ID in order to be able to cast their vote. Because the government is putting this legislation through at the moment, they're casting the responsibility on local councils to prove some kind of paper ID without providing any kind of funding for that at all, at a time when councils are cash-strapped. So I'll be supporting this motion, but let's make sure that people can vote and that voter suppression from central government is allowed to succeed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moss. Councillor Hurst and then Councillor Evans, and that's the only speakers I have indicated so far.
Thank you, Chair. I was half expecting an intervention on a point of order there, hoping for some relevance to the motion that was in front of us, but it didn't come. As we know, democracy is not an ideal system. It's subject to the tyranny of the majority, for instance, in places which are divided along other lines, like Northern Ireland, divided by religion, or other countries which are divided by race. And for that sort of reason, as in Northern Ireland, you have to tweak democracy. And tweaking it in a proportional representation direction is one way to avoid that tyranny of the majority becoming too oppressive. You need a constitutional framework to make democracy work well. Its biggest defect in our country, and we have no constitutional arrangement to correct this, is that parties are free to present themselves to a not necessarily very well-educated electorate along the lines that we will make you much richer, either by inventing magic money or by taking away other people's money and going in for some redistribution. Some countries, like Singapore, have means of controlling that with extreme difficulty, but they tweak their democracy to check that kind of defect. So we want a democracy, certainly, because unfortunately all the other systems are even worse, but we want one which is suitable for our particular situation. Too many of us probably are old enough to remember Tony Benn being on our television screens almost every day. And Tony Benn's every second word was democracy. And I can remember thinking, please, people are not all that concerned about how democratic the system is when it really comes down to it. What they want is good government. And what we need to do is to tweak our democracy so that it gives us the best chance of having good government. The United States, France, India, Singapore, significantly successful countries haven't gone in for proportional representation as it happens. They must have some reason. First past the post, in my opinion, is the least bad option. It tends to produce stable governments, not the unstable coalitions. I said tens. Let's have a little. Think how many governments Italy has had since the war. That's what you get with proportional representation. Secondly,
could you please let Councillor Evans finish his statement?
Undignified interruptions.
Please.
Secondly, it can move a new government in quickly, which we've seen recently. And doesn't have the damaging and embarrassing voids in any government at all, which you get with places like Belgium, also Germany, which has suffered badly from that recently. And finally, it tends to exclude extremist parties, unlike Israel with its proportional representation, which has
Could you bring your remarks to a close?
In excluding its extreme religious right. So, on the whole, it's the best compromise.
Thank you very
We voted on it under the Cameron government. It has been the subject of the British public expressing an opinion.
Councillor Jackson, did you want to speak? Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I do apologise.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just thinking, as the members, the council was speaking, about my grandmother, who used to talk about how proud she was pushing a pram, going to the first election in which women were allowed to vote. I think it would have been 1920, and I think the baby would have been my mother. And it was enormously important to her, as it is to many older people, that they can walk down to the polling station and vote. And as Councillor Moss has said, there is much reason to be worried that this is going to happen in May, and when they get there, they won't have a passport, they won't have a driving licence, they won't know or have the documentation which the government is going to require of them. I'm full of admiration for Councillor Wright and Councillor Malloy and their devotion to the cause of proportional representation, but I do think it is moving the deck chairs on the Titanic compared with the real problem of trying to get people to register to vote in the first place. We've got considerable gaps in our lists. To understand what the new rules are about taking documentation, and better still, why it is important to get a postal vote, because you never quite know what will happen and you may not be able to get to the polling station. So can I ask that if this goes through, the Council also considers how to increase engagement. I was also trying to remember, since there was reference to the members for the 18th century, who it was in the 18th century, a French, Voltaire or Rousseau, can't remember, who said, yes, the English people with their democracy are free at elections. The rest of the time they are slaves, they are nothing. And I think the bigger challenge to us is to get our residents more engaged in every kind of consultation. How many have responded to the local planning policy update? It's not as many as you'd hope. And so on. Get people coming to speak, coming to forums, and getting involved in parish politics. So that's what I challenge you to do, in memory of Emily Davidson, who gave her life to get women the vote.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Hurst, apologies for missing your item. You might
That's all right. It was good for the comedy value of having Councillor Evans' participation first. I wanted to, first of all, thank Councillor Wright for accepting the adjustments to the motion that were tabled. The reason why I want to support this amended motion is that the Lib Dems have a long track record of being supporters of electoral reform and particularly proportional representation. Indeed, for those of us who can remember the articulate way that John Cleese and others in the SDP set out the arguments about our broken democracy back in the 80s, this was a defining moment and kind of was one of the key elements in me joining the Liberal Democrats back then in 88. Our first past-the-post system polarises democracy. It creates a them and an us, and it creates the yard-boo politics that we see both over the pond and in some of the places that have been cited. And it actually forces people to choose their the least worst option, the person rather than the person they want to vote for. The system is just broken and it needs total reform. Our council chamber here, as well as our Parliament, does not represent properly the views and the representation of the communities we serve because of our broken system. One of the key reasons why I wanted the motion adjusted, and I'm glad it was to recognise that our two MPs have very different approaches. So we've already heard about Vera Hobhouse's approach and her long campaigning for electoral reform, her membership of the Electoral Reform Society's Council, and her role on the All-Party Parliamentary Group. On the other hand, we have Rees Mogg, who is only on record, I think this month, for wanting to retain the status quo because the quote in the Mail on Sunday was, he sees proportional representation as a threat to the domination of politics by the right. And it's really about party above country in terms of the Conservatives' approach to hanging on to the current system. The system is broken, it doesn't serve our country well, it doesn't serve our citizens well, it actually leads to cynicism and disengagement in the political process, and and that's why I would urge everyone to support the motion as tabled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hurst. I see no one else indicated to speak. Councillor Hansel.
Thank you. I'll just be very brief. I just want to correct an assertion made by Councillor Evans. He said that there was a referendum under Prime Minister Cameron on a proportional system. That referendum was not about a proportional system. It was about a system where the person with the least number of votes has those votes reallocated, and it was not a proportional system that was being proposed. And even that alternative system achieved a third of the support of people that took part in that referendum. And just one last comment. He said that first past the post brings stability and good government. We all had a good laugh because it's been chaos under the Conservatives for many years. There's been a staggering 80 ministers have resigned this year. So if you call that good government, it's just absurd.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hansel. Councillor Wright, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Evans is absolutely right. People do want good government. The present government has elected 2 prime ministers without anybody in this country taking part in that process, and has lost over £30 billion of public money in the last few months. That is not fair on the electorate. I very much hear the voices today about having a better system of registration and of being able to vote, and the concerns about the ongoing changes to documentation. But possibly the very reason why people don't want to register to vote is they don't think there is a system worth voting for or registering for in the first place. I was delighted to accept the amendments on the work that Vera Hobhouse, MP for Bath, has done on proportional representation. And may she continue to support that work. It is valuable to everyone in our society, and the Green Party applauds her endeavours and dedication. I can only say, if we want a better system, then we need to change the system we have. It has no longer working. So I call on everybody to vote in favour of the motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as put? Thank you very much. All those against? Thank you. And all those abstaining? 2 abstentions. Thank you. That motion is carried. Now we move on to item. If people are happy, you've only got a few items to go. We'll have a comfort break. Yeah. Item 15 is a motion entitled LGA Safe Local Services Campaign, and I invite Councillor Samuels to introduce this motion.
Thank you, Chair. When the 6th Tory Chancellor since 2010 stood up just before noon to address the Commons, few in local government anticipated any largesse towards the sector. A harsh austerity budget to address the schoolboy economics errors committed by his predecessor was expected, and the 55 billion plus bill for this failed Tory social experiment will be met by everyone in the UK in the coming years by, as I referred to earlier, the largest protected drop in living standards since the 1950s. For local government, the news was, at best, no worse than expected. The Chancellor has followed the path charted by his predecessors of continuing to defund local government by failing to recognise the pressing needs and costs of children's services, delaying urgently needed adult social care reforms, and recycling old cash in the guise of new money, and failing entirely to recognise the inflationary effects we are seeing every day. But to move the motion before us, I want to provide some context to this motion, and it's been very instructive for me to look at the last budget set by this Council in 2010, before successive Tory Chancellors began their deliberate campaign to defund local government. In 2009-10, this Council set a net budget of £123 million and received central government grant of £7.5 million to support local services. At today's prices, accounting for inflation over the last 12 years, that would equate to a net budget today of £175.8 million, with expected government grants of just under £11 million. As it is, we expect to set a net budget of around £131 million in February and receive no central government grant. During that lost decade, the council has lost around 120 million of what would have been normally expected government grant, which has been withdrawn. And as a result, there has been need for all parties to make constant cuts in services every single year and increase council tax to, in part, make up that shortfall. The Institute for Government has identified that cuts in central government grants of 37% in real terms have been made since 2010, cut from 41 billion then to 26 billion annually. I haven't had a chance to update that to today's figures. At the same time, council tax has been raised overall by 25% since 2010. So what we have seen is the transfer of central government funds raised by graduated taxation to regressive taxation in the form of council tax. As Bath North East Somerset was even in 2009 the 5th lowest unitary council recipient of government grant funding per capita, at levels below £2.5 million recognised then, we should have been receiving. It's not hard to see why there's a problem. Put quite simply, Tory governments are shortchanging this council and forcing it to make unpopular cuts year on year, raise council tax to increasingly unsustainable levels, while at the same time imposing increasing obligations for new services and then not fully funding them. Now, the Local Government Association, whose campaign this is, represents all the local authorities in Britain, whatever the party that controls the councils, and launched the Save Local Services campaign ahead of the autumn statement. In the wake of the statement, the Tory chairman of the LGA, Councillor James Jameson, said today, while the financial outlook for councils is better than we feared next year, councils recognise it will be residents and businesses who will be asked to pay more. He went on to say, financial turbulence is as damaging to local government as it is for businesses and financial markets, and all councils and vital services such as social care, planning, waste and recycling and leisure face an uncertain future. Now, what does all this mean? Well, we provide around 800 services which we're legally required to provide and impact on every single member of our communities, from personal social care for older and vulnerable adults to specialist services for children and young people, to cleaning and maintaining the streets. Members will be familiar with all of this. Councils are also responsible for housing services and making sure that private landlords meet minimum standards. Very topical this week, in view of the reported case of a child who sadly died from ingesting mould. So what's the government doing about council funding? Well, the short answer is not much. After the 27 general election, Theresa May promised to carry out a fair funding review which was supposed to address funding inequalities between councils. However, a review that simply focused on how the cake was cut.
Could you draw your...
Yes, I'm nearly finished. And ignored the key question of what the size of the cake should be was never adequate. Now, there's little in today's announcement, I'm afraid, to say that we'll see any relief for this council.
Thank you very much. Councillor David, I believe you're going to second the motion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to support this motion, which draws on the excellent work that the Local Government Association is doing on behalf of all councils to fight for local services. Listening to the autumn statement today, I was struck by how little local government was mentioned. The NHS was referred to 18 times, and local authorities were mentioned 3 times. In relation to the allocation of Household Support Fund, the decision to delay social care reform, and then regarding the introduction of some more elected mayors, so we were little more than a footnote. This is somewhat galling, given that councils like us are on the front line of delivering some of the most important public services, including special educational needs and disability support, services for the homeless and old people's care. We deliver services that people expect and rely on. We empty the bins, clean the streets, and look after some of our most treasured public spaces. But sadly, year on year, cuts to our budget mean that these services are gradually being eroded. I recently met a gentleman who used to work in our Parks department. He started work in the 1960s, and back then they had a team of around 20 people to manage Royal Victoria Park, and now this staffing level is greatly reduced. This is just one example, and our Parks team do a brilliant job, but the reality is that they are underfunded, and we have no choice about that. The government talks about wanting to improve pride of place across the UK, but they have failed to provide local councils with the resources to make this happen.
We simply can't go on like this. For me, the answer is not to cut back on the functions that local government provides. Instead, councils must be properly funded to do the job that our residents expect us to do, to maintain our streets and public spaces, to provide safer and more sustainable ways to travel, brilliant playgrounds and youth services, alongside all of our statutory functions. The policy approach of this government has been a hand-to-mouth existence with settlements made year by year. Councils are asked to compete for funding for vital infrastructure and projects, spending hours of office at a time with no guarantee of funding. We need a grown-up relationship with central government, with the proper devolution of funding, longer-term settlements and the freedom to set our priorities. So I encourage all colleagues across party to support this motion and send a clear message back to government on the need for a better deal with long-term sustainable funding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dando.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The Labour Group will be supporting this motion, and indeed I would be hoping that all councillors in this chamber would be supporting this motion, because if you're not, I'm not really clear what you're doing here for the rest of the year, because I'm not sure whether we're going to have any money left. And I'm pleased that Councillor Samuel's here first, but he mentioned the work that the LGA have done and the reports that the LGA put into central government to reflect the crisis that central government has placed local government in. And the chair of the LGA yesterday did say that in order for local council funding to stand still, it would require an increase in council tax of 20%. The government have now said that authorities like us can increase our council tax by up to 5% without a referendum. I'm not sure where they think residents are going to find 5% to support local government services on top of the increases in fuel bills, inflation, mortgage costs. Rents can go up by 7%. Where's that money going to come from? And alongside that, a number of local authorities, and I'm hoping that this one isn't going to be one of those, have indicated that they will be imminently placing Section 114 notices in effect, effectively declaring themselves bankrupt. So after Chancellor 4 and Prime Minister 3 drove the economy off the cliff, not just on a cliff edge, they actually took it over the cliff edge. We have a crisis. We need to come together to try to identify ways to support this council, its staff, its residents, all those who rely on its services, and we need to keep banging the drum that local government is going to keep this country going over the next 6 months and beyond, but it cannot do it by continuing to go back to a well which is more than dry. So I'm happy to support the motion, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dando. Councillor Hurst, and I have no one else indicating.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. For too long, central government of all flavours have asset-stripped local government, and this has continued today. We need to reflect on all the crucial services that we've heard about that this council provides to residents. Local government has been hollowed out to the detriment of our residents. Stimulating growth in our economy has never been more important, and local government can play a key role in doing that if it has the resources and abilities to do that. We've heard over recent days and previous conversations, political rhetoric about the importance of the broadest shoulders bearing the burden. And what actually we're having in government is that central government is forcing local government to bear a disproportionate amount of the burden of squeeze on public service investment, and it just has to stop. We have to do better by our residents and stand up and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no one else indicating to speak. Therefore, Councillor Samuels, would you like to summate?
Yes, I would. I'll finish the remarks that I wasn't able to at the beginning. Frankly, there is no fat left. There is nothing to cut. That's the truth. I've been doing this job now for 4 years. There is no spare fat anywhere in the council's budget. That's the blunt truth. So if we want to do something, something else has to be cut. That's the blunt truth. There's no kind of magic here. And the truth is that since 2010, savage cuts have been imposed on local councils by successive Tory chancellors. Local government is underfunded for the job it's expected to perform. The consequence is that services will be cut and council tax will be raised every year, and that actually is what one of the things the Chancellor said today. He expects council tax to go up by 3%. It's us who provide the services most residents value and are concerned about. It's not the central government. They don't do the things people are bothered about, we do. And reform is urgently needed to break the tight central government control, the straitjacket that we're in. It's an impossible task. The maths simply cannot be made to add up. And the only way to address this problem is that we're afraid we need to change the government. You lot have totally failed. You've run the country into the ground. You've let inflation go rampant. You've run up a £55 billion bill that we've had to see filled today, and we'll see living standards drop for the next decade. Believe me, electors will be reminded of this next year. So I hope you vote for this and don't sheepishly follow the party line, which is what I expect you to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Samuels. So we've had the debate, it's been proposed and seconded and summated. Can I see all those in favour of the motion on the LGA Save Local Services? And all those against? And any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to the penultimate motion, and it's item 16, community warm spaces, and I believe Councillor Moss will move this on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you very much, Chair. In a sense, this motion kind of follows on neatly, is not quite the right word, from the discussion that we've just had. And what I'm doing is moving the latest version of the motion, which you'll have seen come through this afternoon. I don't really apologise for the fact the motion has changed slightly over the last few days. In fact, I'd like to thank Dina and the administration for the discussions we've been having about how we can make this motion better, because it's a working document. I was chatting to Dina a few days ago about this, but of course the context has slightly changed because of the announcement this morning, and certainly what Richard said about there's no money left, and that the headlines from the Conservative government's been there for 12 years is things are tough and they're going to get tougher and you're going to get poorer by 7%, is a message that's going out to our local residents. And I think the importance of this motion is twofold. First of all, it's how, as a cash-strapped local authority, do we work with local communities to actually help people who are really stuck, who are getting poorer and who are worried. But the second part of the motion is we need to be talking about this, because I think something we learnt from the COVID lockdowns, particularly the second lockdown, is there are a lot of people out there who are isolated, alone, and are very worried about how they're going to cope and think they're on their own. And I think part of our community leadership role is to make sure, as far as we can, to let people know you're not on your own, there is support, there is help, and you don't have to be lonely, you don't have to be isolated, and all the stuff with mental health that comes from that. And as I say, I think it's an important motion in that community leadership role. And I pick out two particular elements of it. First of all, I think the fact that this is not the end of the story, that it's how we actually meet on a regular basis, how there's a network in Bath and North East Somerset to talk about what resources are available. And for example, I know that Radstock Town Council, Westfield Parish Council, plus community organisations and churches, we're going to be talking over the next few weeks and the next month about how we coordinate what we are doing so that we can advertise that to people. But also, how do we use the limited resources that we have in order to support those organisations to be able to open their doors for local residents to provide those warm spaces. And I'll use the example of a local church and a local vicar I've been talking to. They haven't been able to open up their community space or to register their space as being open because of the size of their fuel bills and because of their old boiler.
and they find it difficult to register because they know that some money will be available. I'm certainly not knocking the £250, but £250 for some organisations actually doesn't touch the side. So can we, and are we able, to do the same as some charitable trusts, is actually using capital money to support, in effect, revenue over the next few months as a step towards how can we make sure that community organisations and community spaces are actually more fit for purpose for the following winters and the years that come, because this isn't just one winter, and that's how can we capital support insulation of buildings, how can we capital support the better and more efficient fuel supply, how can we be nimble, how can we best use the resources that we have to work alongside our partners in the community. And it isn't a begging bowl, but it is, Richard, and to yourselves in the administration, is, how can we have those discussions to make sure that we do the best we can. So in summary, it's an important motion, and I hope everyone supports it, because it's what we can do as community leaders. It sends an important message out there. And I think as well, it sends an important message out there that while this is a motion that initially came from the Labour group, it's been seconded by the Cabinet member. I hope there's all-party support, because I hope throughout this chamber, everyone knows that we are headed for a long, cold winter, and for some of our residents it's going to be a lot longer and a lot colder than for many of us in this chamber, and it is our duty to make sure that we support them as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moss. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Moss, for bringing forward this motion and for accepting changes to the original, so we have what is before us this evening. It gives us all an opportunity to showcase the warm welcome package as set up by our library service, and also to thank all those communities and organisations who have already come forward to offer their places as part of the support available within Bath and North Sea Somerset for those who are really worried about turning on their heating or about using their electricity for fear of high bills or indeed loneliness. We saw how working together in times of need, such as during COVID, with our Welcome for Refugees, and now during this cost of living crisis, makes a huge difference to the lives of our residents. And I am immensely proud to be able to play a tiny part in this collaboration between this council, partners and our communities. If anyone here or who is watching is aware of a community place that would like to get involved, then please look at the Council's website for more details, including on the Charter. Please note that we have already earmarked funds to pay £250 to any organisation which is already registered and needs additional financial aid for heating costs or for provisions or to go towards activities. We are also working on how best to add to this fund, but I am sure you can all appreciate we had to wait till today to hear what was in the autumn statement, and we will need to work out the consequences of that before confirming any funding. I am more than happy to second this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Meara. I have Councillor Wright, then Councillor Appleyard.
The Green Party really welcomes the motion on warm rooms and the many positive actions that this council and the many local organisations and residents are taking to support people in their communities to stay warm. What we can do to support our residents is vital to the work we all do. However, the real issue is that people do not have enough money to heat their homes because they are not paid enough, and because the energy giants like Shell and BP are presently earning massive revenues and profits from the price hike taking place due to the war in Ukraine. Further, the housing stock in the UK is poorly insulated, probably one of the worst in Europe. Bath is well known to be a location for some of the most poorly insulated properties in the UK, which annually means many do suffer unnecessary hardships. The Green Party has repeatedly been calling for emergency winter fuel payments, for insulation grants, and has been campaigning for better insulation in all homes for years. Millions of people are now facing fuel poverty at a time of low wages and rising prices. Again, I welcome the Warm's Room initiative, but why should people be forced out of their homes to find warmth? There should be a national plan for providing affordable energy, stopping prepayment meters, which is causing unnecessary hardship and suffering to many families, and taxing the oil giants on their unimaginable profits. The Green Party wants to make polluters pay by introducing an immediate windfall tax on oil and gas company profits and calls for longer-term policy of a carbon tax. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Appleyard and then Councillor McCabe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was quite fortunate enough about a week ago to host a meeting of the Christian Action Network, which is a group of church leaders in Bath who came together to discuss this very subject about how they can actually support the Warm Room initiative. And what came out of that was a recognition that pretty much every single warm room will be different. It have different requirements because of the different settings and things like that. And how do you actually affect a space? Because it's been mentioned about heating up space anyway. So they were looking at the activities that are already being provided and how they could elongate that time either before and afterwards to create these times where people can actually visit. But also what came out of it is the recognition that it's not all about the warm space. It's about dealing with, I think Councillor Moss mentioned it, the loneliness and isolation that people feel. And what do we do when we hit March, April next year when the warmer weather starts to appear? And how are these people going to be supported, or will they still want to actually sort of meet in there and things like that? So it is much wider than just that, the warm air, a warm space and things like this. So I think this is a great initiative for community and also for supporting people with isolation needs and other support mechanisms in there. So I will certainly be supporting this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Appleyard. Councillor McCabe and then Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to have a little jab and say you must have read our focus that we sent out to Bath Avon South residents last month, but I won't do that. But we did get some feedback from some of our residents in Bath Avon South when we put in a little note about the warm spaces, and that was the matter-of-fact way that I had written about it. And I was asked, where was the shock? Why were you not appalled? Why didn't you put any emotion into what you said? And they've got a point, because I have been knocking on doors recently and I've been met by a woman wrapped in her duvet because she couldn't afford to turn the heating on. But she works from home, so what was she supposed to do? I've met a number of Conservative voters who are appalled at the situation in this country. Today, for some reason, I was knocking on Conservative doors, people who do not recognise their party and what their party is doing to the country. This is an important motion, and I will be supporting this motion because I am appalled that as a council, not only does our authority area have to have food banks, but now we have to find warm spaces for our residents who can't afford to heat their homes. And I'd just like to mention the work that our churches will be doing in Bath Avon South and how they've come together to find the spaces, although churches themselves are very difficult to heat and very expensive to heat, that where churches do have other buildings, those will hopefully be coming along as part of the list. So I will be supporting this motion enthusiastically.
Thank you very much, Councillor McGee. Councillor Davis and then Councillor Sandra.
Somebody who very rarely speaks and won't be going back at the political digs that are being made, but I am, without my council hat on, work with a network of hall chairs which cover the whole of Baines. We have people from the Percy Centre, out in the Bath Eastern area, we have out in the Chew Valley, we have our own around where I am, where we work quite closely together as a network, and we come under the heading of Wern, and I would suggest they may be a very good group that you look for community support, because we do help each other. We're the ones that when we get there, as I say, it's nothing to do with me as a councillor, it's just as a chair of a hall. When we get there, we can help each other on where to get grants, because councils can't get the grants, but the charities can get the grants and then help with the heating and things like that. So yes, I've obviously told them about digging in at your eye a little bit, but there are other ways in which we can get to help these groups. So they are an area that I would suggest you talk to, because we cover the whole of Baines as community spaces. As I say, Tracy Centre, frequently there, out in the Bath, even South area, because some of the halls out there, Camerton area. We cover the whole area. I'm more than happy, Dean, at some time, if you want to get a link into there, but because I'm a bit more for a practical person, try and find you an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. That's a very helpful contribution. Councillor Samuel.
Thank you, Chair. It is shameful that this country has come to this. A G7 country having to open its community rooms and public buildings to keep its population warm. This is disgraceful. If you contrast our approach from our government to France, for example, France has in frozen energy prices this year 4% rise. It'll do 15% next year. But most importantly, and our government is doing very little on this, the Chancellor glossed over this today, there is a huge insulation programme going to take place in France, where France is aiming to cut energy consumption across the board by 10%. And these are the kind of things we need to be doing. France has intervened in the energy markets vigorously to protect its population, and I'm afraid I see no such sign here. So I'm completely behind this. In terms of finance, Andy Rodder and I have already had conversations about how we could probably use the Welfare Support Fund, which is a government fund directed at the most vulnerable, to help this. And we will find solutions. We will do whatever is necessary to make sure that the organisations who run these warm spaces are not financially out of pocket from doing so. So I really applaud all the work that's been done, and we will stand behind that financially as far as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Samuel. There are no other councillors indicating to speak, so Councillor Moss, would you like to sum up, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the contributions as well, and for what people have said. I think there's, and I'm sort of looking at Dina here, I think part of the discussion that we've had over the last week and the way this motion has been put, we've concentrated too much on the issue. And we've been talking about, and my moving was talking about how we deal with the crisis this year and how we can prepare for next year. And I'd like to thank Joanne and I'd like to thank Richard for their timely reminders that we've been concentrating so much on how we can sort the problem out that we haven't actually been thinking about how the bloody hell did we get in this situation to start with, and how can we make sure this never ever happens again. And I think thank you for reminding us of that. I still think it's a very good motion we put together because it's responsible of us to do that, but actually to step away from it. And as Richard said, how on earth does a G7 country get into the state that we are in and have been in for a number of years now? And I think the point that you were making, Matt, about the emotion, you should put more emotion into leaflets all the way talking to residents. I think you almost get numb to what's been happening time after time over the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moss, for summarising. We now move to the vote on item 16, community warm spaces. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you much. I think that looks unanimous. Anyone against? And any abstentions? No, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Our penultimate item tonight is a motion for Councillor Furze entitled Ending of Yangji Friendship Agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone. I put this motion forward for ending the Bath and North East Somerset, Jiangxi Province and City of Xinjiang Friendship Agreement that this council has had in place since October 2009. Now, many of you, even as elected, but certainly before you were elected, probably didn't even know we had a friendship agreement, and certainly for the last 6 or 7 years there's been no functioning agreement at all to speak of. When this agreement was first put out, the
People's Republic of China, Communist China, was on a different path than it is today. And as I say in the preamble to the resolution, is over this time we've had the agreement, there's been political suppression and the breaking of international agreements in Hong Kong, expansionism in the South China Sea, serious military threats to democratic Taiwan, and now the United Nations report on human rights abuses on the Uyghur population, specifically in the Xinjiang region. That's the very far west of China. Now, the UN report is this report, which is very, very damning, and I shall touch on some headlines in there in a second. Remember that our agreement from us as a council is with the council in both the province and the city that I mentioned, and that means that it's with the senior people of that city, which are all members of the Chinese Communist Party and all answerable to the authoritarian regime that presides over them. The report talks about the human rights abuses with the Uyghurs and oppression of and it touches on the oppression of Hong Kong. And I'd like to also highlight in the preamble there the Amnesty International, what they state, that the human rights situation across China has deteriorated across the board. So that's not just in the far west, but that includes the region that we have a friendship agreement with and the city we have it with. Yeah. On this journey, since about 5 or 6 years ago, the national security laws of Hong Kong were established, which enabled human rights violations in Hong Kong, and that has been heavily criticised by one of our previous MPs in Bath, Lord Chris Patten, and he regularly goes on and talks about the human rights abuses happening and the anti-democratic situation in Hong Kong. So it's also been put to me about why are we doing this now? The timing, as I say, the timing of this report is the key factor, although there are other elements on the journey. We are not alone. There are other councils that have also rescinded their friendship agreements with both the regions and the cities that they are friends and twinned with. And the other question, one of the other questions put to me is about the impact on our own inward tourism. Now, I will make it clear, this is not about welcoming or not welcoming individuals to Bath and North East Somerset. Everyone across the globe, from wherever they are very welcome to Bath and North East Somerset, very welcome to visit our World Heritage City and our World Heritage Site of the Roman Bath. So, we are blessed with those attractions, and people make those decisions on visiting us about those attractions, not whether we've got a twinning friendship or not. Yeah. The other issue that's been put to me is as to the universities themselves. Now, there's been a lot of discussion, not from myself, but others in my group with the universities on this issue. And the universities, I would say, have bigger fish to fry. Their connections with Confucius Institutes and the control and security over sensitive research is more their tribe, and it's got nothing to do with whether individuals come. So I therefore resolve, Mr Chairman, so I see the orange light's gone on, the Council resolves to give notification that Bath and North East Somerset will terminate our friendship agreement with Jiangxi Province and the city of Xinjiang, to express condemnation of the Chinese government's treatment of the Uyghur Muslims and human rights activists, to show solidarity with the people campaigning for freedom and democracy in mainland China, Hong Kong and Macau, and to write to our MPs for Bath and North East Somerset, urging them to lobby the government for action in relation to the treatment of Uyghur Muslims. I so move, Mr Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moss, I believe you're seconding this motion.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. More than happy to second this, and thank you, Andy, for asking me to second this. And I think when we talk about friendship, let's be clear, this is not saying that it's about friendship with the people of China or visitors from China. In fact, I'd hope we'd be supportive of people who are fighting for their freedom in China, who want freedom of expression in China. What this is about is an increasingly centralised, oppressive, dictatorial regime that in the People's Republic, I'm sure it's a People's Republic, of China, and it is quite right that we should be making this move to cut those links with the official Communist Party, at the same time as saying that you hope that for most residents in China that things will improve over years, not as they have been over the last few years, getting worse, particularly for minorities.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Brien, I believe you're moving an amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to propose an amendment. I abhor oppression. Whether due to race, creed or colour, it's odious and totally indefensible. The treatment of the Uyghurs and other minority groups is both horrific and despicable. I therefore utterly endorse resolutions 2, 3 and 4 of this motion. However, I do query the wording of the first resolution. My understanding is that this link with a city in China was an attempt to bring our peoples more closely together so that they could see that a vibrant, free, democratic society was good to live in. I acknowledge the confirmation that Councillor First has made that this movement should not be seen as a slight to our local Chinese community, our Chinese tourists, or indeed our Chinese students. He also acknowledged in his statement that there had been no communication between ourselves and Jing Zhezhong, not bad, for a number of years. I believe, therefore, it would be proactive to write to them to express our concerns regarding their city's behaviour in terms of the report from the UN and ask for an explanation so that they are quite clear about why we intend to sever this connection. Depending on their response, we could be therefore clearer about the way forward. So my proposal is that Resolution 1 says to communicate with the leadership of the province and the city to express our concerns regarding the content of the UN report and request a timely response from them. I hope you will accept.
Do you accept?
No, I'm not.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder to that motion amendment? Councillor Pritchard?
Yes, I was.
Thank you very much. So now we move to the debate on the amendment that has been put, because it has not been accepted. I have 4 speakers indicated so far, and I'll ask them if they want to speak on the amendment or the substantive. Councillor Dr. Kumar, do you want to speak on the amendment?
No,
Councillor Dando? Councillor Wright? And Councillor Hurst?
I'll speak on the amendment because the points are similar, really. I think earlier on today we heard about how we've become numb to certain things in our political life, and I think we have become numb to what's going on in China because we have it on the news, and we live in this 24/7 news cycle, and actually. So before this meeting, I dug up the Amnesty report on China and just read it, and it makes your blood run cold. Well, the human rights situation across China continues to deteriorate. Human rights lawyers and activists report harassment and intimidation. Unfair trials, arbitrary incommunicado, lengthy detentions, torture, ill-treatment. It goes on. The key headings when you go through their report: severe crackdown on human rights defenders, trips, access, travel to and from ethnic minority regions remain highly restricted, severe restrictions on freedoms of Muslims in the Xinjiang area, tight controls, restrictions on online freedom of expression, China remaining the world's leading executioner, all through figures on executions and death sentences remain a state secret, preventing independent scrutiny, and the list goes on. We have to make a stand. I don't think writing a letter is good enough. We have to while friendship agreements I think are really important, and we should be offering our friendships, we should be exploring friendship agreements with people like the pro-democracy camp of Hong Kong. We shouldn't be offering friendships to the people who are committing these atrocities and these human rights abuses. So I don't think we should accept the amendment. Thank you.
Perhaps no one else has indicated to speak on the Councillor Guy.
Very quickly, Chair, thank you very much. I wasn't going to speak on this item, but just for clarification, the Conservative Party is asking Baines Council to write a letter to the Chinese Communist Party to ask them whether they accept the UN's decision on they are horrific at human rights. I wonder what response the Chinese Communist Party may send back to Baines Council on this item. This is another example of how out of touch the Conservative Party is locally and nationally, and I cannot support what is, quite frankly, a ridiculous amendment.
No one else has indicated to speak on the amendment, therefore we move to the vote on the amendment.
Can I sum up on the amendment, Chair?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Apologies.
It's okay. I'll test you later on the constitution. I shall be brief. Chair. I do take the point that you're making, Councillor, about the hand of friendship. But I would say that the hand of friendship did go out in 2009 when we opened up that friendship agreement, because things weren't all rosy in China with the Chinese Communist Party back in 2009. But they were on a route where the world, and us included, thought things were going to get better. Hence why that hand. And I'd be the first to hand anyone that hand of friendship or hold them an olive branch. And I think we've done that. We've seen what atrocities have gone on. We've read these reports. I think things have got worse, and therefore the only power we have as the leaders in Bath and North East Somerset is to remove that friendship, which they've obviously not welcomed or granted because of the atrocities going on. And Councillor Guy's right, I'm sorry, but if we wrote to the leaders of either the province or the city, they would respond like they did to the UN report, saying nothing to see here, this is all internal and none of that is true, it's all a pack of lies. And I'm sorry, but that's where we are, so I shall be voting against the amendment, but thank you for allowing us to have that debate, I think.
Thank you very much for summing up on the amendment. Can I see all those in favour of the amendment on behalf of the Conservative Group? Yes, all those in favour of, we're voting on the amendment, all those in favour of the amendment proposed by the Conservative Group? All those against? And abstentions? And 2 abstentions, so that has failed. So we now move back to the debate on the motion, and the first person I have to speak is Councillor Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. I start with a very small but incredibly important point. It is ridiculous, it is embarrassing that this motion, which is in the public on Council's website, shows that the proposers have not even taken care in writing the name, spelling the name of the Chinese province they want us to cut friendship and friendly ties with. No province in China is called Jiangxi, Jianxi, which is on your website even today. It is called Jiangxi, Jiangxi. I asked, first of all, this to be corrected. Chair, there is a saying in China, based on their own experience, that wise people make bridges. Wise people make bridges, fools build walls. If this council passes this motion, we are building an unnecessary great wall of Bath and hurting ourselves. Let us be rational, Chair. Chinese people are the largest ethnic minority community in our county, bigger than Indians. Chinese students are the largest group of international students at our university. What does this motion signal to them? The Chinese visitors to our Roman bath increased from 12,000 in 2005 to 85,000 in 2015 and almost 200,000 before the lockdown. The Chinese tourists contribute 1.1 billion annually to the British economy and millions to our economy. Because of your unwise spending, this council budget is in the red. And yet, with this piece of gesture politics, I repeat, gesture politics, you are sending a strong signal. You want to turn our backs on the Chinese visitors and their spending, because that is what the motion will show. Chair, in 1950, UK was the first major country in the world to recognize the People's Republic of China. In 1972, we started having full diplomatic ties. Chair, the human rights concerns are in many countries, including in our country. For example, Hungary, an EU member, is the only major, except Belarus, European countries whose government apparently supports Putin's invasion and has murdered tens of thousands of people in Ukraine very recently. The logic of this solution is that Bath should end its twinning with Hungarian city of Kaposvár.
Thank you.
No, I urge that let us build bridges, not walls.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Councillor Dr. Kumar. Councillor Dando, you have, and then Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chair. I hesitate to follow that, to be honest, but I will, because I think no one who has read or listened to any of the testimony coming out of this part of China, and indeed other parts of China, could fail to understand the situation there. And I think the mover and the seconder of the motion were very clear, and I don't like the idea that people in this debate are conflating issues and trying to suggest that this is somehow an attack on people of China, because I think in this council chamber we express solidarity for all peoples in struggle, and I think it's unfair and unfortunate if we try to make this an issue which it's not. This is about saying to the governments of those areas, and maybe Andy might like to amend his motion to say governance of the provinces, because that makes it absolutely crystal clear. It is about saying there are certain behaviours that are unacceptable, and that we do not wish to be friends with people who behave in that way to their residents. To an extent, I can understand why people who show authoritarian tendencies support authoritarian regimes, but I would urge you to have a good look in the mirror, give your head a really good shake, and recognise that this motion is correct. And just to be cheeky, because I won't get the chance to make a speech on the next item, given if we pass this, which I think we're going to overwhelmingly, clearly not unanimously, but overwhelmingly, on the basis of one out, one in, this clearly demonstrates that we do have a mechanism to have friendship with our colleagues in Ukraine, who I think are far more deserving of that support at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you much, Councillor Dando. The last speaker I have indicated is Councillor Wright, and then I will move to the vote.
Thank you, Councillor First, for bringing this motion to the Council. I think it's really important that we do end this friendship. 70 years ago, the Chinese invaded Tibet, which was an independent country. And in those 70 years, many people, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, have been forced into entering India and living as refugees in that country. China has had a terrible human rights record in Tibet, and the call for those people in that area has been unequivocal and, on the whole, non-violent. And at all times, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has called for non-violence. And the Chinese government has never listened to that. And Tibet is known as probably one of the worst areas in the world in which there are civil rights and political freedoms. So I very much support the motion and its intention, because what it is saying is the Chinese government is wrong in its approach to its own people and their own freedoms, and that should change. And we can't stand by and allow that to happen. And the only way that we can do that is through our non-violent action, which is what we are doing. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Councillor Wright, for that contribution. Your last speaker, so Councillor Furze, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the input to that. Just on the point from Councillor Kumar, we're not really talking about Hungary or Belarus tonight. We're talking about our own friendship. What's our gift with the governance of these provinces, and I take on board Chris Dando's comment there. It is about our relationship with the governance from those provinces and the city, not the individual people who themselves are oppressed. And as Councillor Wright goes on to say, it's about trying to show solidarity with those people, not making deals with the authoritarian regime, but opening up our friendship and with the Ukrainians, our homes, to those people that are oppressed across the globe. And this motion touches on some of that. We can't right all wrongs, but we can remove our hand of friendship, which was set out in 2009. And that's what we're doing. So we're not building walls, we're just removing our hand of friendship that we had set out before. Just a couple of points I'd like to finish on, Chair, on the United Nations report, just to remind everyone what we will be voting on. The report is very clearly that there's racial and religious discrimination, linguistic discrimination, re-education camps, ill treatment, forced labour, torture, detention without trial, large-scale arbitrary detention, sexual violences against women. That's what the report, if I could sum up the report, that was it in those few bullet points. And that's what we will be voting on when we vote on this motion, that those are abhorrent and we can no longer have our friendship with this province or this city in China. I so move, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we move to the vote on item 17, which is unamended, in ending the friendship agreements with the province and city as indicated. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as put? Thank you very much. And those against? One against. And any abstentions? And one abstention. That motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. We now move to item 18 on the agenda, which is questions and statements from councillors. Can I please refer councillors to the 4 questions which have been put by other councillors, which have been circulated with responses. And now I invite Councillor Dr. Kumar to make his statement on Bath Deserves Better, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In the greatest epics of Hinduism, Sri Ramcharitmanas, Swami Tulsidas writes, Vinas Kale Viparit Buddhi, which means that when doom approaches, the minds of the doomed start working against their best interest. Mr. Chairman, the Swami would recognize what is happening here in Bath. This administration, facing doom in a few minutes' time, is fixated on animosity. Bath deserves better. Governing well requires being open-minded to others' ideas, but the current administration only favors partisan politics, not truth and reason, but power and manipulation. We need to show mutual respect and treat others with dignity. With dignity, I repeat. Yet, just last Thursday at Cabinet, a senior leader of the ruling party called my group leader a liar and suggested that we all are blind. Cannot we use some more civilized words? Many in this chamber will know that I am currently taking the party opposite to the court, so I suggest stop discrimination and bullying. Bob deserves better.
Councillor,
Bob deserves better, sir.
Could you talk about Bath
deserves better? That is what I'm saying.
And if you want to, I would urge you not to potentially talk about matters which could be defamatory, frivolous, or offences, and also contain allegations against or comments about the conduct of individual councillors.
No, that's fine.
That is not allowed.
No, I very much
if you continue, I will stop you from speaking.
Okay, so let us look more widely, Mr. Chairman. I mean, one of the examples, again, if you don't allow to talk about the personal things, then I will not say, but even in the PDS committee meetings, lies were spread by the administration. So I say once again...
Councillor Kumar, I just said, before you just spoke again, that you cannot make those allegations about the conduct of individuals and saying that someone is lying. It's not
somebody in the cabinet meeting can say again and again that you are lying.
Thank you very much for your statement. I will call you to end now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you much for attending full council tonight. Can I just remind you, before you all start leaving, that we have a special council meeting on the 19th of January to discuss the local plan partial update adoption, and given this is the last meeting before Christmas, and tonight the Mayor and myself switched on the illuminations of the city and the countdown to Christmas, and again to Keynsham next week for their Christmas lights switch on, can I be really sad and be the first person to wish you a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year, and I'll see you in January.